All right. I think we're live. Let me just double check and make sure that we are actually live on YouTube and on LinkedIn. We are also live on are we live? We're also live on Instagram. So we should be live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. But let me just check to see if it's actually working. Because it doesn't look like it's working. So what is going on? That's pretty weird. I see there's one person on here. Can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, can you maybe say something in the comment section just so I know that you can actually hear me? Because I'm not seeing the live stream. Which is weird. Okay. We're live on YouTube. That's good. So we're there, and then let me see how do I get this to work on LinkedIn? Sorry guys. Bear with me for a second here. So I want people to be able to actually see and hear me. Okay, here we go. Yeah, all right. We're live on LinkedIn, and we're live on YouTube, and we are live on Instagram. All right, guys. So while we're waiting for more people to sign on, the way this works, for those of you who are new, I do this live Q&A once a month, and typically at the beginning of the month, just to answer whatever questions you guys might have about the investment banking recruiting process. Now, right now for this month specifically, we usually have like a topic that's kind of timely, but for this month, I think the most timely topic right now is that a lot of the summer 2025 applications have recently opened. We've been tracking this very closely for our students, and at a minimum, we know there are 5 top tier firms that have already opened their applications. So RBC Capital Markets was the first one to open. That was all the way back in like September. So that one's actually been open for almost 3 months now. But starting about 3 weeks ago, things started to pick up a bit more. And so I think Houlihan Lokey as well as Rothschild both opened back in mid-November. And then just this past week, 2 more banks opened, which are Deutsche Bank and Guggenheim. Okay, so what this means is if you are a sophomore, which means you have either a graduation date of May 2026, May or June 2026, depending on the school you go to, or maybe you're graduating a semester earlier or later, you're graduating December 2025. But if you have a December 2025 or May or June 2026 graduation date, then you are considered a sophomore for investment banking recruiting purposes. Okay. And so if that's you, then it's basically go time, right? Make sure you're not, asleep at the wheel, basically, because these applications are open. You're going to have to apply very soon. If you haven't been networking with these firms, you got to start networking now. Ideally, you've already been networking, but if you haven't been networking with them, you got to start networking now. Because ideally, you want to get those referrals before you have to apply, or even if you can't get it before you apply, then you want to get them as quickly as possible shortly after you've applied, right? And so all of that takes time. And then obviously, once you apply too, assuming your resume looks good and assuming that your networking efforts actually pay off, then hopefully you will get an interview. And if you get an interview, that's going to happen pretty quickly as well. And so that means that your behavioral interview prep and your technical interview prep, like both of those things need to also be happening basically in real time as we speak, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, if you are not a sophomore, let's say you're a junior or senior, and you're still recruiting for like a summer 2024 offer or even a 2024 full-time offer, we can talk about that too if you have questions about that. If you are a freshman and you're starting early, good for you. That's awesome because honestly, the best time to start is freshman year, so you can get ahead of the competition. You have questions about that, we can talk about that as well. So why don't we do this? As usual, if you guys can populate the chat with whatever questions you guys want me to answer, just drop your questions in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or you're on LinkedIn or you are on Instagram. And I'm just gonna spend the next 50 to 55 minutes or so um, going through all the questions that I get. If we have enough questions, we'll stay on for the full hour. If we have more questions than that, I might be able to stay on a little bit longer. I do have somewhere to be after this. If we don't have enough questions, then we'll wrap up early. But usually we have enough questions that last us throughout the entire hour. So I'm going to go through the questions in the order that they come in. So if you want to get your questions answered first, start dropping your questions in the chat right now, and we'll go through them in order. All right. While you guys are doing that, or while we're waiting for you guys to populate the queue, for those of you who are not familiar, just tell you a little bit about kind of Wall Street Mastermind and what we do and why you should even listen to me. We've been around for about 6 years. We've helped around 1,200 students during that time when it comes to investment banking recruiting. We have placed our students into every single bulge bracket and elite boutique bank on Wall Street, and like the majority of the middle market banks as well. I would say probably 44 or 45 out of the top 50 banks we place students into. And so we're just very knowledgeable about how these firms like to recruit, what they're looking for. We've been able to do a lot of pattern recognition over the last 6 years in terms of like, hey, what are all the commonalities between our students who have been successful in these processes? And then we kind of have turned that into a playbook that we then share with all the other students that we work with, which basically makes their lives a lot easier when it comes to the investment banking recruiting process, right? Perhaps more importantly, we've also got some of the best coaches that you could possibly find anywhere. A lot of the coaches, all of the coaches on our team have actually worked in the industry, needless to say, but some of the coaches on our team have also been like global heads of recruiting at top tier banks like Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse and UBS and Lehman Brothers. For those of you who are old enough to know what Lehman Brothers is, it's basically the predecessor of Barclays Capital. And so these people like literally built the recruiting processes at a lot of these top bulge bracket banks from the ground up, right? Like when you talk about the scoring rubric that's being used to evaluate you as a candidate these days, like they pretty much designed that, right? And so like when it comes to like knowing what you should be saying during these interview processes or during your networking processes, like to give the banks what they want to hear or what they're looking for, like there's no one out there that's more knowledgeable than these coaches when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? And that's why our students are so successful, because they have people like that in their corner, which, as you can imagine, is a huge competitive advantage. Like it makes it like not really a fair fight almost, right? So anyway, that's a little bit about us. And we've been doing this for a long time and growing very, very fast. And we're the first company in our industry to kind of adopt this model of kind of like this high touch, long-term coaching model, as opposed to like, just you DIYing everything yourself, memorizing a bunch of interview guides, questions that you don't really understand, taking complicated financial modeling courses. Like we don't do any of that, right? We also don't take like the hourly tutoring approach that some people take, because quite frankly, investment banking recruiting process is it's very involved and it's very long-term. It's not something that you can kind of get really good at in just like an hour or 2 hours of work. It takes weeks and sometimes months for you to really check all the boxes that you need to check. And so you really need someone to like be there with you step by step throughout the entire process. And so that's the approach I would like to take. So we really like develop like a personal relationship with all of our students. And then we built this nice community of both past and current students who have either already gotten into investment banking or currently trying to break into investment banking. Call ourselves the Wolf Pack. Like I said, 1,200 strong, and a lot of really successful alumni at all the top tier firms, both on the banking side and the buy side. And they continue to give back and help the students out who are currently still in the program by sharing job opportunities, sharing just intel in general about recruiting, sharing interview questions with each other, and just like constantly helping each other out. So it's a very nice little community that we built, and our students really love it. So anyway, that's a little bit about us, and that's why everything I'm going to be telling you today, or all the answers I'm going to be giving you in response to your questions, are based on like basically my experience over the last 6 years helping these 1,200 students. So there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat experience there that is just hard for you to replicate otherwise. All right, so I see a couple questions starting to come in. So I'm going to start answering these questions, and hopefully you guys have more questions. You can continue to drop them down in the comment section. All right. Give me 1 second. I actually realized that I'm on the wrong channel on my Instagram, which is why no one's showing up there. Let me go to the right channel real quick. Apologize. I was like, why is it all like people that I know that are on here? Which is funny. Sorry, I see the questions from LinkedIn. Give me 1 second, guys. All right. I will be. No. Huh. Okay. All right, we'll see if that works. But let me go to the first question. Jibri Martin Edwards, what are some essentials to know when recruiting more specifically with elite boutiques? Yeah, so to be honest, the stuff that you need to know for elite boutiques versus bulge brackets are pretty much very similar, right? Like the 4 main boxes that you really have to check are you need to have a good resume, you need to network really well and have a minimum 1 person at the firm who's willing to refer you, but ideally, I would say even 2 to 3 people, because we've seen a lot of people who maybe have gotten 1 referral at a firm and still don't end up getting an interview because they have all their eggs in that one basket, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out, right? So those are the 2 things that will determine whether you actually get interviews or not, right? And then beyond that, obviously, like once you get the interviews, you still need to get good at answering behavioral questions and also technical questions, right? And so those are the 4 boxes you have to check. The first 2 determine whether you get selected for the interviews or not in the first place, and the last 2 determine whether you can pass the interviews. I will say, so like that's the same no matter what, even if you're recruiting for bulge bracket banks or elite boutiques. But I will say for elite boutiques specifically, I think that the technical questions tend to be a lot harder in our experience, because we've seen the questions that, well, what happens is our students, they've interviewed at all the bulge bracket and all the elite boutique firms out there, and we've gotten offers from every single one of these firms at this point. And they also come back and add the questions that they get during these interviews to like a centralized database that we keep for our students, right? And so that's we actually see firsthand what kind of questions these firms like to ask, and the technical questions that the elite boutiques ask just tend to be quite a bit harder for whatever reason. And so that's one thing to note, which is like, your technical skills probably have to be even better if you want to work for an elite boutique, just because the expectations are higher. And I think like the work you do at an elite boutique tend to be a bit more technical, right? Because you're primarily working on M&A. So that's more modeling and more technical skill set needed. That's why they do that, right? And then the other thing I will say is also in our experience, the elite boutiques tend to be more selective too. Okay, so now we're finally on Instagram. Sorry, guys. I know we're supposed to go live earlier, but I ended up doing it on my personal account, which is I didn't realize it was on the wrong account. So anyway, now we're on. If you guys have questions on Instagram, feel free to drop them in the chat, and happy to answer them. All right. But anyway, coming back to this question, they're more selective in the sense that like they're typically pickier about what schools they recruit from. They're also typically pickier about like your GPA because they don't have to hire as many people. They have much smaller classes than the bulge bracket banks. And so they have the luxury to be able to just be more selective when it comes to like the criteria, right? And so generally speaking, just I would say everything is slightly harder when it comes to getting an offer from an elite boutique than a bulge bracket bank. But like the framework of like what are the boxes you need to check, they're kind of the same. It's those same 4 boxes I talked about: resume, referrals, behaviorals, technicals, right? But just like the bar is higher across the board. So that's kind of how I think about it. Um, Let me know if that makes sense, Jabri, or if you have follow-up questions, feel free to, ask, and I'm happy to answer them as well. All right. Let me go to the next question. So Albert asks, hi, Sam. Thank you so much for helping us live today. My name is Albert, and I was just wondering if it's too late to start networking to places if their apps have already opened. I noticed Guggenheim's apps open today. Additionally, how many networking calls would you recommend me making to put myself in the best position to get a first-round interview? Many thanks for listening to this. Yeah, Albert, it's a good question. So I think Guggenheim actually opened, I want to say like 4 or 5 days ago. 4 or 5 days ago, maybe even 6. But you probably just only saw it today, right? So yeah, like I said at the beginning, for those people who just joined and missed it, like for summer 2025, we've seen, I think, 5 top tier firms open their app so far, right? RBC opened all the way back in September. Houlihan Lokey and Rothschild opened in mid-November, so it's been about like 3 or 4 weeks, probably 3 weeks. And then within this last week, Deutsche Bank and Guggenheim both open as well. So I would say all those firms are either bulge brackets, elite boutiques, or I guess in the case of Houlihan Lokey and RBC, I would consider those to be like, the top tier of what you would consider to be middle market banks. So yeah, like the app's definitely open. You're correct. But as far as your question of like, is it too late to start networking? No, it's not too late, right? Obviously, the sooner you start, the better. And my advice to people, like people always ask, like, oh, do I have to network before I can apply? Or can I apply first and then network afterwards? In an ideal world, if you can manage to do this, you would ideally network first before you have to apply. Ideally, you even line up the referral before you have to apply, because some firms on their applications, they will actually have a question where they ask you, if there's anyone at the firm who referred you or anyone at the firm before, and you can actually put their name down in the application. And then sometimes they might go and ask that person what they think about you and so on and so forth, right? So the ideal scenario is you've already done that. You had those conversations prior to the applications opening up. Now, if the application is already open and you haven't done any networking yet, then I would still say it's better late than never, right? So in that case, some firms will actually list the application deadline on their job posting. So you can get a sense for like how much time you have before you absolutely have to apply, right? Like you don't always have to apply on day one. A lot of firms don't post the application deadline on the job posting though. So in which case, like you might be a bit more in the dark. And then also like one very important piece of advice, which is sometimes even if they put an application deadline on the job posting, especially if the deadline is like very, very far out, like sometimes we see applications open in December or January, and then they'll say, oh, the deadline is in August or September. That's almost never a real deadline. I don't know why they do that, to be honest. They're almost always like going to interview people way earlier than that. And so best practice is, regardless of whether they have an application deadline on the job posting or not, the best practice is to try to reach out to a recruiter at the firm. You can go on LinkedIn and you can like look up the title you're looking for is pretty much like campus recruiter or on-campus recruiting, something along those lines in their titles. And then like a lot of times it's even more granular than that. Like they'll say, I'm a campus recruiter for investment banking, or I'm a campus recruiter for asset management, or I'm a campus recruiter for, I don't know, engineering. Like obviously you want to find the person that's a campus recruiter for investment banking, right? And I would just reach out to them and ask them like what the real deadline is, or like when are they going to start reviewing resumes. And then if you can get a definitive date, then you know that as long as you apply before that date, then you should be fine, right? So then you might be able to delay a little bit and go and do some last minute networking before you have to apply, right? The other way you can maybe try to find the correct recruiter, especially if you go to a target school, is to just go to your career center at school and ask the person there who is the recruiter from Guggenheim or whatever firm you're interested in that's responsible for your school. Like they'll have a liaison at the firms that's kind of like their point of contact, right? So that's another way to do it. If you go to a non-target school, you probably don't have that luxury. But the bottom line is go straight to the source, see if you can figure out what the actual deadline is, regardless of whether they actually post on the application or not. And then that tells you like how much time you have or how much time you can wait. How much more time you can wait and basically continue to network before you actually have to apply. And then like no matter what, make sure you apply before that deadline, right? Or if you can't figure out what the deadline is, then like make sure you don't wait too long to apply, just to be safe, because you absolutely do not want to miss that deadline, right? And even after you apply, you can still continue to network with people at the firm. Like even if you're already in the system, like a lot of times the interview process doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes they have multiple rounds of interviews or multiple batches of candidates that they do first rounds with on different dates, right? And so even if you network with someone after you've already applied, if they really like you and they want to help you, they'll still have ways where they can go and, flag your resume for the right people. Like you're already in the system. You're also going to send them your resume anyway, so they have it. So it's not the end of the world if you absolutely cannot get it in before you have to apply. But that's kind of how I would think about it. Basically, it's a nice to have, not a must, but try to do it beforehand if you can. All right. So let me come over to Instagram real quick. Just make sure that I'm not ignoring you guys. Alfred asked, thoughts on a 3.7 GPA for a non-target? I mean, look, from a GPA standpoint, if you have at least a 3.7 or higher, usually I would say that's like no questions asked. Meaning like you're not going to get grilled about why your GPA is not higher. And even if your GPA is lower than a 3.7, to be honest, like we have students that get GPAs with 3.5s, 3.3s, even as low as like 3.0s. We have like one or two really, really crazy examples where they got in with like a 2.9, but like definitely don't recommend that, right? Like the higher your GPA is, the better. But I was like 3.7 or above is like no questions asked. If you're below a 3.7, you definitely need to like, prep an answer about like why your GPA isn't higher, right? And you need to have a good answer for that, which is also something that we commonly help our students with. Coming from a non-target school, I would just say like the bar is higher for you for everything, right? So if you're at a non-target school, you definitely want your GPA to be at least above 3.7 ideally, so that you can show that you're at least still like a good student, versus like, if you have a low GPA and you go to a non-target school, that's just one additional obstacle that's stacked against you, which is not ideal, right? I think like at the undergrad level, bankers understand that some students who go to non-target schools aren't just there because they're not like a good student or something. Like some people for college, there's a lot of people in non-target state school because they couldn't afford to pay $70,000 or $80,000 a year to go to an Ivy League school. Maybe they would have qualified for an Ivy League school, or maybe they even got in, but they didn't get enough scholarships or financial aid or whatever, and their family's just not in a position to pay for a very expensive school like that. And so that's why they choose to go to a state school, which is to save money, right? And so they're not going to like automatically write you off just because you went to a non-target school. But like that's why it's even more important that you show that you are a good student by getting good grades, right? And I'm not saying, by the way, that like going to a non-target school is not a disadvantage. It is. Like it's definitely easier coming from a target school than a non-target school, but it's gonna be hard no matter what. But also like it's possible to break in regardless of what school you go to, because we have like over 50% of our students do not go to target schools, and many of them have gotten offers, right? So as long as you know what you're doing, it's absolutely possible. All right. Okay, so let's come back to LinkedIn. So Kostab asks, hey Sam, thanks so much for helping out. What does it mean to check all the boxes? So when I say check all the boxes, I'm just referring to kind of the four things I talked about earlier, which are the four major boxes you have to check are: one, having a good resume; two, making sure you're getting referrals from the firm through your networking efforts; three, your behavioral interviews; and four, your technical interviews, right? If you want to go a little bit deeper into each one of those areas, I would say like on the resume side, of course, like formatting has to be just pristine, right? Like a lot of people really fuck this part up where their formatting is just super poor. But like, that's like just the bare minimum, right? Like you have to format your resume well. If you don't know how to present yourself the right way, if you have a bunch of formatting errors, like that is a huge no-no in investment banking, because you're going to be working on presentations for board of directors and CEOs and CFOs, and they want to know that you can format stuff correctly, right? And so, but that's the easy part. The harder part on the resume is like the actual substance of the resume, right? Which is like obviously how good of a school you go to. That's a part of your resume, although that's unlikely to change, right? So that already is what it is. Your GPA is part of your resume. That's very important. If you have good test scores, that can help your resume a little bit. And then like the most important things that you actually do have some control over are your internship experiences. It's probably the most important piece. Making sure you have as much relevant experience as possible, right? And so the most competitive candidates that we see nowadays, by the time they have to apply for their junior summer internship, which again, that process is basically starting now if you're sophomore, like starts halfway through your sophomore year, right? The most competitive candidates we see have probably usually like 3 relevant internships on their resume by the time they have to apply. Really, really extreme scenarios that we've seen as many as 4, usually 4 because there's not enough time to do more than 4. But I would say the 4 is the kind of outliers. 3 is like already like your top shelf, right? But like some people have 2. Minimum, you need at least 1, right? Like if you have no relevant experience whatsoever on your resume and you're trying to apply for these jobs, like you can kind of forget about it, right? Like it's just like if I don't know you at all and I get your resume and I'm like, I can't tell at all that this person even has any interest in finance, why would I ever give you an interview, right? And so like that's like I was like relevant experience, like stack as many of them as possible, like ideally 2 to 3, like minimum 1, right? And if you ask like what's relevant, I would say like you want to get as close to investment banking as possible. It's like ideally doing something that's like transactional, right? Meaning like investment banking, private equity, corporate development. Those are all like M&A deals, right? Corporate banking is considered transactional as well. Or something that's like valuation related. So like if you do like equity research or you work for like a small investing firm, like small hedge fund or a family office or something like that, where you're actually having to like, analyze individual stocks and put price targets on, whether you think a company is overvalued or undervalued, like that can be very relevant experience to investment banking as well. So you want that type of experience, right? Oh, search funds. Search funds is another go on, which is really good for like entry level people, right? So that is like probably the most important part of your resume. And the other things like leadership experience on your resume is like getting involved with like school organizations, ideally relevant ones to banking, like student run investment funds or investment banking clubs or private equity clubs or things of that nature. And not just like, oh, I'm a general member, but like, ideally you are taking on leadership positions. You don't have to be like the president or something, right? Not everyone can be the president. There's only one president every semester. But like even just like taking on any sort of active leadership position, like you're a head of a committee or something, like you don't want to just be like general member for everything you're involved in, because that shows that you're not actually very involved at all, right? And part of the interview is like they want to hire candidates that have leadership qualities, right? And so you want to demonstrate that. So that's kind of like the first box, which is the resume. And like the better your resume is, the easier time you're going to have with networking, because a lot of times people say, oh, like bankers aren't, which is the second box we're going to talk about, is like you got to network to get the referrals, right? But like a lot of times people say, oh, like bankers don't talk to me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like, is it my email? Is it this? Is it that? Like, yes, like your email matters and how you write that matters. But a lot of times it just comes back to like the most basic thing, which is like your resume sucks. If your resume sucks, think about it from the banker's perspective. Like if you're a banker working 80, 90, 100 hours a week and you're super busy already and you barely get to see your wife or your kids or your girlfriend or boyfriend or your friends, like, and then you're getting all these networking requests from students that you don't know, you're going to be pretty picky about who you talk to, right? Are you going to want to spend 30 minutes of your time out of your super busy schedule talking to someone that doesn't look qualified on paper and probably has no chance regardless of what you say to them? No, you're not, right? And so that's why like there's also an order of operations here, which is like you have to kind of make your resume respectable first before you start pouring a bunch of time into networking, or else like you're going to waste a lot of your time and effort and people aren't going to just like be responsive, right? But on the networking side, it's all about like how do you get as many referrals as possible. But to get referrals, you have to first get people to agree to talk to you either on a phone or in person or whatever. For most of you, it's going to be on the phone, unless you go to school in like New York or something, or one of the major financial centers like San Francisco or LA, and you want to work in the office, right? But so how do you get people to get on the phone with you? Well, you have to reach out to them by email. And then like, so the question becomes like, how many referrals do I need? And it was like minimum 1 at each of the firms that you want to apply to, right? So like if you are targeting all the bulge bracket banks and all the elite boutique banks, and maybe even like a couple of the top middle market banks, like Houlihan Lokey, like RBC, both of which are already open, like I said, It's easily 20 to 25 firms right there, right? And so I would say like your assumption should be that if you don't have any referrals at the firm, you're most likely not going to get an interview there. Okay. So that means at minimum, you need one referral per firm. That means you need 25 referrals. Ideally, like I said earlier, you don't want to put all your eggs in that one basket. So ideally, you have 2 or even 3 referrals. So let's say if you're targeting 2 referrals at each firm and there's 25 firms, that means you need 50 referrals. So then you can back into like, okay, if I need 50 referrals, if that's my goal, that's my end goal. How many people do I need to talk to get 50 referrals? Well, that depends on like how good you are at having those networking conversations, right? How good are you during these coffee chats and how good are you on the phone? Are you able to build really, really good rapport with people? Are you able to get someone to like you? Do you know what questions to ask? Do you know how to answer the questions that they're asking you? There's a lot that goes into that, right? So let's say like if someone is really good at networking and they're able to get like 20% of the people that they talk to help them. So it's a really good number, actually. 20, if you can really get 20%, that's really, really freaking solid. Okay, well, that's 1 in 5. If you need 25 referrals and you get 1 in 5 people to help you, that means you need to talk to 125 people, right? Then from there, you back into the next step, which is, okay, if I know my goal is to talk to 125 people, how many bankers do I actually have to reach out to? Well, the answer is not 125. You know why? Because if you only reach out to 125 bankers, not every single banker is going to respond to you. A lot of them won't respond to you, right? So there's like a response rate to your emails, which then comes down to like what I said earlier. How good is your resume? How good are you at writing those emails? How persistent are you with your follow-ups? How many times do you follow up? So on and so forth. And how do you do that like tactfully without, you want to be persistent without being annoying, right? And so same math, right? Let's say your response rate is 20%. And if you need to talk to 125 people, and your response rate is 20%, then you probably need to reach out to 625 people, right? These are like hypothetical numbers. I'm not saying that's going to be 20% conversion rate for you guys. Every single person is different, depending on your profile, what school you go to, how many alumni you have, what's your GPA, how many internships you have in your resume. There's a lot of factors, right? You kind of have to start doing some of these things to even be able to figure out what your conversion rate is in the first place, right? So, and you collect some data, but like a lot of people don't even measure this stuff. So if you don't measure it, you can't possibly know what your conversion rate is. And if you don't know what your conversion rate is, then you can't possibly know like if you're on the right track or if you talk to enough people. So for most people, they just like go about it super arbitrarily. Like, oh yeah, like this hand wavy thing. Oh, these are the alumni I found. Like, okay, I'm going to talk to these people. And like, oh, okay, I'm out of alumni. I've reached out to every single alumni. Like, I guess I'm done, right? Like, that's not a good strategy, right? You need to be more deliberate about it. So anyway, that's like a high level on like the networking side of things, right? Then the last 2 boxes, the behaviorals and the technicals. On the behavioral side, so most people like neglect the behaviorals in my experience. Everybody's like super focused on the technicals because they're worried that they're going to mess up on technical questions. Technical questions are important, don't get me wrong. But like, to be honest, the technical questions are just like, that's the bare minimum. That's the table stakes. Okay, to use an analogy, like if you play poker, that's the buy-in for you to be able to sit at the table and even play the game. Like if you don't know how to answer technical questions, like you just be automatically eliminated and there's nothing else to talk about. But like for you to actually win the game, everybody's buying in, right? And out of the people that have a seat at the table, it doesn't mean you're going to win. Like to outplay other people, to actually win your hands, that comes down to your behaviorals. Because when you get to a super day, every single person there is probably going to be able to answer technical questions, or they wouldn't have made it that far. And so you knowing how to answer like what is a DCF is not going to set you apart from the next guy who also knows how to, do a DCF, right? And so like the thing that's really going to differentiate you from other people is actually on the behavioral side, which is like your story. Like if I ask you, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to do investment banking, or why do you want to work for Morgan Stanley and not Goldman Sachs? Whatever you say to that is going to be different from what the next person says, right? And then so that's where there actually starts to, you can start to create some separation if your answers are a lot better than the next person's answers. Okay, so on the behavioral side, you're actually being graded on a curve, right? Like there's no right or wrong answer. It's not like, oh, if you say these sentences and these exact words, then like you get an offer. Like no, right? It's more like the analogy of like writing a final paper, right? It's not black or white. It's not pass fail. You write a paper, and then your professor is going to grade your paper on a curve relative to like other people. And it's like, do I like your paper more, or do I like that person's paper more, right? And so, so it comes down to like knowing what the grader is looking for and what the grader wants to hear, and then taking your stories and your experiences that you had in the past and then matching it to what the banks are looking for, right? This is why, like, for all of our students that we work with, we actually have like the coaches on our team that used to be the former formerly the global heads of recruiting at some of the top bulge bracket banks, like Goldman Sachs, like Lehman Brothers, like Credit Suisse, like UBS. Like we have these coaches that know exactly what the scoring rubric is because they designed it. And they've seen all the feedback from all the interviewers that have interviewed all the candidates, and they know what the bankers like and what the bankers don't like. We have them meet with our students individually to identify all the best stories and best examples from their past that they should be using for these, like the list of most common like questions that you have to prep for, right? And even after they come up with their answers using those stories, we will then go through their answers and like redline everything and basically like mark everything up and rewrite it for them until it's perfect, right? That's why their answers are going to be a lot better than their competition's answers, because most people, they just don't even know what the banks are looking for, and they have what they want to say, but they're not really sure if it actually matches what the bankers are looking for. And also they're not really sure. They know what they want to say, but they don't know what other people are saying. So they're not sure how their answers stack up against other people. You want someone who has actually seen a lot of other people's answers to help you benchmark your own answers so that you're not just guessing, right? And the other thing that we like to do too is like we call them mock interview hot seats, where we'll put people in a mock interview, but then we'll let other people observe so that you can all see how other people interview and how other people are answering the exact same questions you're trying to answer, so that you can really truly calibrate how good you are, right? That's going to give you a lot more confidence. So anyway, that's on the behavioral side. And on the technical side, last but not least, like I said, you still need to know your technicals. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say like don't study your technicals. But on the technical side, I actually think this is the easiest part. A lot of people think this is the hardest part. I think this is the easiest part if you actually know what you're doing. So like you need to basically know like a few major topics: accounting and the 3 financial statements. So income statement, cash flow statement, balance sheet, right? You need to know valuation methodologies. It's primarily trading comps, precedent transactions, and discounted cash flow. Some people will put leverage buyouts in there, but okay. Merger math, so M&A math, so like accretion dilution. What happens when you combine two companies, and how does that change your financial statements? And then leverage buyouts, or LBOs, which is when like a private equity firm acquires a company using a lot of debt. How do you kind of like do the math there, right? It's like just a more complex form of M&A that has a more complicated capital structure because there's a lot of different tranches of debt involved, right? And so those are the 4 major areas that you have to know. And to be honest, like here, like the mistake that most people make is usually we see 1 or 2 methods that people go about studying their technicals, right? One is they'll take one of the popular interview guides, the 400 questions guide, or the Wall Street Oasis technical guide, or the Wall Street Prep Red book. I mean, those are like probably the 2 or 3 most popular interview guides out there, or the Breaking the Wall Street guides. And they'll just go through it and like memorize the answers to all the questions. The reason why people are doing it this way is because they talk to their upperclassmen and ask, hey, how did you study for your technicals? And all their upperclassmen did it this way. And then so they tell them like, hey, this is what you should do. And so they go and do that, right? Here's the problem with that. It's called survivorship bias, which is, yes, that's what everybody's been doing for the last probably 10 to 15 years since these guys kind of became very prevalent. And so you're always going to find people who got in by doing it this way. I'm not saying it can never work, but for every one person that does it this way, we could probably find 8 or 9 people statistically who did it that way and did not get in. The problem is like you're not going to go and talk to the people who didn't get into banking and ask them for advice on like what not to do. If you actually did that, or if you actually asked the people who didn't get into banking what they did or how they studied, they're going to tell you, oh yeah, I just memorized these guys. I actually did the exact same thing as the other guys, just that I didn't understand it, right? And so most people make the mistake of thinking like, oh, this must be the way to do it because everyone I know is doing it this way. It's like, this actually doesn't mean that that's the most effective way. It's just like, that's just been the only way for a very, very long time, right? But the problem with memorizing those guys, and the reason why it doesn't work anymore nowadays, is because they've been around for so long and everyone reads them. So your interviewers know that everyone's reading them. Your interviewers themselves, when they were coming up, read those exact same guides. So it's becoming too predictable, right? And if you think about it, if everyone's memorizing the same guides and the interviewers know that, when you go into an interview, they're not going to ask you the exact same questions from those guides because that doesn't really help them figure out who's actually good and who's not, who actually understands this stuff and who's just like regurgitating what they memorize without really understanding the concepts, right? So nowadays, like, and again, going back to what I said earlier, like we have a database with hundreds of entries of actual interview questions that our students have submitted. This is like crowdsourced from, the 1,200 students that we've worked with to date, right? And so we see all the questions that these banks, these top tier banks are actually asking, and they do not ask you the questions that are from the guides anymore. They ask you harder questions. They'll change it up. They'll change the numbers. They'll rephrase it, package it differently, dress it up so you don't recognize that it's the exact same question. And they just ask more like application-based questions, which is like, it's not even about like definitional stuff or like, tell me the formula for DCF anymore. It's like talking about it in a more like application level, right? It's like if I give you an actual company and then you have to like talk about it almost like a case study, right? That's a lot harder because it's not about like, oh, did you memorize this thing? It's like, do you know how to actually apply it to a real world situation, right? And so that requires you to like truly actually understand the concepts, right? So that's like method number one that we see a lot, which doesn't really work that well. Method number two, that also doesn't work, is a lot of people will then like take financial modeling courses to learn their technicals. This one's probably even worse than the first method because none of the top tier banks, none of the bulge bracket banks, none of the elite boutique banks, and none of the reputable middle market banks, like all the banks in the top 50, I would say, none of them will actually give you a modeling test during your interviews. Like they do not take out a laptop and hand it to you and say, here, build me an LBO model, or here, build me a merger model, or build me like they just don't do that. And again, we know this because our students tell us what questions they got asked during the interview process. So I'm not saying there's no place for a financial modeling course. I'm saying like the timing of when you take a financial modeling course is important. Most people put the cart before the horse. Financial modeling courses teach you how to do the job. They don't teach you the skills that you actually need to get the job, right? And so the time to take financial modeling courses is after you've gotten the offer. You usually still have months before you actually start the job. And that's when you should be taking financial modeling courses to prepare for like the job itself. But before you've actually gotten the job, don't put the cart before the horse. Learn the skills that are actually necessary to pass the technical interview, which is like, what are they actually testing you on? They're testing you on your ability to verbally explain these concepts in a way that's simple and easy to understand. So the real test to whether you can do this is, can you actually teach this to someone else who's a total newbie to finance, to your mom, to your dad, to your siblings, whoever that has never touched corporate finance concepts before? Can you explain to them what a discounted cash flow is? Can you explain to them what a leveraged buyout is and how it works and why it works that way? If you can do that, then you're ready. If you can't do that, if you can't teach it to someone else, then you don't actually truly understand it. Okay. So when we prep our students on technicals, like that's how we like to teach them too. It's like we're teaching them the skill of like how to actually verbally explain these concepts and how to actually be like understand to the point where you can actually teach it to other people. And when you learn it that way, that's why I say it's actually the easiest part of the recruiting process. I would say like you can learn everything you need to know in probably about just 20 to 30 hours, especially if you have a good teacher, okay, which we do, right? So anyway, those are the 4 boxes that you got to check. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I went a bit more detail there because I think like those are all very important things that everyone on here needs to know. In fact, like those are the common mistakes that we see people mess up on or not even think about. So that's how I would think about those things. And like, if you guys need help with any of those 4 areas, either some of them or all of them, then I would encourage you to book a call with our team, www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply, and book a call with our team, and we can talk to you about like how we might be able to help you with basically all of the above. All right. The street's abbreviated to ST, by the way. It's wallstmastermind.com/apply. All right. Let me go to the next question. So there's a question on Instagram from Danny Gonzalez 07. It says, why do IBs ask brain teasers if they're actually not meaningful for the job at hand and they're not indicative of how you actually handle unexpected issues at the job? Yeah, I would actually say most investment banks don't actually ask brain teasers anymore. They were kind of popular at one point, but it's not very common anymore for the exact reason that you said, which is doesn't actually like demonstrate how good you are going to be on the job. I would say it's like something that you should still spend like a little bit of time on when you're preparing, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. It's like not a high priority. The one firm that I know that loves asking brain teasers still is Centerview. But outside of that, like we don't see it come up that often. Like all the other stuff, the behaviorals and the technicals that I talked about are way more important. But I think the reason why people ask it is just like, again, going back to my point earlier, like they want to see how you think. Like brain teasers test you on your critical thinking skills. And so anyone can just memorize a bunch of answers. It doesn't really tell you like if you're a good thinker or not, right? And so with brain teasers, just know that like it's not really about, I think where people mess up is like it's not really about having a right answer or getting to a right answer. A lot of these brain teasers don't actually have a right answer. The firms that the point of the brain teaser is like to actually show them your thought process. So show them like step by step, like, well, first I will make this assumption, then this assumption, then this assumption, and then like how that builds up to your answer. Or like if you're missing what the assumptions are, then like what questions would you want to ask? Like they're also testing on your ability to know like how to ask the right questions, right? So if you know how to do those two things, then like brain teasers aren't going to be, they're not supposed to be hard, right? It's just about knowing how to approach it. Okay. And there's plenty of materials online that walk you through how to do that. So I would just look that up. Kash Mustafa asks, what firms have open apps? Yeah, so I talked about this earlier, but you probably just joined. But RBC has been open for summer 2025 since September. Houlihan Lokey and Rothschild both opened about 3 weeks ago in mid-November. And then within this past week, Deutsche Bank and Guggenheim both opened their apps as well. So there's like at least 5 firms that I would consider to be top tier that have opened apps already. And then, we expect more to open between now and the end of the year. And then certainly like there's a lot of firms. Like our students have been networking with these firms and talking to people about the firms, talking to recruiters, talking to bankers. And a lot of firms are also going to be opening up like January, February. Like from this point onwards, there's just going to be like new firms opening up on a weekly, if not monthly basis from here on out. Right. So, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at with the open apps. Okay. Let me come back to LinkedIn and YouTube real quick. So how are we doing on time? Okay. We got 13 minutes. All right. Kostov says, do we know when all the bulge bracket firms will typically open their applications? Yeah. So, I mean, Deutsche Bank already opened, right? But typically for most of the other bulge bracket banks, a lot of them will open basically during like the spring semester of sophomore year. So I would expect look, it happens earlier every year. So I would not be surprised if any of them start opening up like from this point onwards at any point, right? But pretty much most, if not all, the bulge bracket banks will for sure open at some point between now and the end of your sophomore year. And then some of them will finish recruiting even before you finish sophomore year, before sophomore summer starts. And then some of the bulge bracket banks will recruit into your sophomore summer. And typically I find like the U.S. bulge bracket banks typically finish recruiting earlier than the European bulge bracket banks. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind too. So like by the time it's sophomore summer, a lot of times it's some of the European banks that are still recruiting, like Deutsche Bank, like Credit Suisse is not a thing anymore, but like UBS and Barclays and firms like that, right? By the time you get back to fall semester junior year, like pretty much all the bulge bracket banks are going to be done in our experience. And all the elite boutique banks typically finish even earlier. All the elite boutique banks finish recruiting by the end of your sophomore year before you go into sophomore summer. And so that's why I always tell people like, the sooner you can get your offer, typically the better offer is going to be because the more options you're going to have available, right? That's why like there's no time to waste. Like you have to have a sense of urgency. You have to like start preparing as early as possible. And like no matter when you start, you still want to try to check all 4 of those boxes that I talked about earlier in the shortest amount of time possible. And so that's why the most efficient way to do that is to have that are actually experienced in your corner, answering your questions 24/7, coaching you, walking you through the process, giving you the exact playbook on what to do versus what not to do. So you don't have to do any of the trial and error on your own because that's what kills you, right? Like if you had to do a bunch of trial and error and figuring out and experimentation and messing up and making mistakes along the way, that's what ends up taking a lot of time, right? So anyway, so that's the kind of bulge bracket timeline. All right, a detail from YouTube. As a sophomore, does it matter where you work? Does it have to be brand name or you just need any type of experience to set yourself up for a solid junior or summer internship? Yeah, detail. I assume you're talking about like either internships you do during sophomore year or like a sophomore summer internship, right? It does not have to be a brand name firm. Okay. In fact, unless you are like a diversity candidate, which means for most firms, like a lot of these bigger firms that have brand names, they only have sophomore internships if you're a diversity candidate. So that means that like if you are ethnically diverse, like if you're Black, Hispanic, Native American, those are considered diversity. Gender, so if you're female or if you're LGBTQ, that's considered diverse. If you are, if you have some sort of disability, some firms have diversity programs for disabled people. This doesn't mean you're missing like an arm or a leg necessarily, but like sometimes people have like, I don't know, learning disabilities or other like much like ADHD, for example. I've seen people use that, right? What else? If you're a veteran, like if you have military experience, if you served in the Army or Navy or stuff like that before, some places have programs for that. And then Last but not least, this is more rare, but some firms will have diversity programs for like people who are like first generation college students. Although that's like pretty uncommon, but I have seen it. So unless you're one of those, then the expectation is not that you would have a brand name internship on your resume per se. I would say it's more important to have a relevant internship on your resume, meaning you're working at an internship where you're actually learning like relevant skill sets to banking, right? So I kind of talked about what those are earlier, but like, you either want to be doing something transactional like smaller investment bank or private equity firm or corporate development or even corporate banking, search funds. Those are all like, deal related, right? Or you could do something that's valuation related, like equity research or valuation or any type of investing role where you having to analyze individual companies and stocks and put a price target on it and determine if a company's overvalued or undervalued. That can be very, very relevant as well, right? So that's what I would be focused on if you're like an underclassman. Okay. Let me come back to Instagram. Views on sports investment banking. Don't have much of a view on it. Like I wasn't in sports investment banking. I did tech investment banking, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on sports investment banking. I do know that there's been a lot of deal activity in the space. There's a lot of like sports teams that are being bought and sold by billionaires, and sometimes outright, sometimes as even just like a minority stake or whatever. And the sports team valuations keep going up and up and up and up, right? And so like it's definitely a cool and sexy space to be in, but it's also very niche. Like not every bank has like teams that cover sports investment banking, I would say, where some of them may put under like media and entertainment. So like if that's what you want to focus on, like it's going to be a lot more niche, a lot more narrow, and there's not going to be as many opportunities, right? So another question from Parker. Given that banking recruiting is getting months earlier each year, do you anticipate that it will eventually get to a point in a few years that recruiting will start first semester of college / before college? You know what? It's funny that you asked that. I hope not, but I also would not be surprised if that happened. The reason why I say I hope not is because it already is happening so early. Like we're asking sophomores who are basically 18-year-olds to decide like what they want to do for their career, which a lot of people like don't know what they want to do when they're 19, right? And also like to be honest, I mean there's jokes that like people saying, oh, eventually they're going to start recruiting like seniors in high school, right? I think like the only reason that would go against banks starting that early is that like you still need some time for people to like build up their resume and do relevant internships and take on leadership activities in clubs and like do stuff to like really differentiate themselves or separate themselves from the pack. If you start doing that first semester of freshman year, no one's going to have had a chance to even do that. So then what? You're just going off of people's experiences from high school. But like most people don't have any real experience from high school. So how are you supposed to differentiate between different people? Like then at that point, I think like what will happen if that actually does happen, if it actually gets to that point, then people are just going to solely rely even more on like, oh, what school do you go to? Oh, you go to Harvard? Oh, you go to Wharton? You go to Columbia? Well, I guess like, we're going to bet on you instead of like the person that goes to like a non-target school. Like, I think banks are trying to move away from that and trying to like diversify where they hire from the school standpoint. So I think that would just be counterproductive, right? But I don't make these decisions, to be honest. So who knows? I think like from a competitive standpoint, like the reason why it keeps moving up earlier every year is because these firms think that if they go earlier, they'll be able to get the best candidates, right? And so I don't know if that dynamic is ever going to change. Like a couple of years ago, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan tried to like lead the effort to push things back. So they like publicly came out and said, we're going to not recruit until later. And they pushed their recruiting timeline back. And I think like maybe the thought was like, hey, we're Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. And so like if we push it back, maybe other people will follow because we're like, two of the top 3 banks out there. And then like nobody else followed pretty much. And so like after like a year or two of that, Goldman and JP Morgan basically capitulated and they moved their recruiting timelines back up again. And so it's just like, it's a very difficult dynamic to change across the entire industry. So I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, look, I recruited for banking back in like 07, 08. So that was like, what, 15 years ago, right? Back then, we didn't have to recruit for our junior summer internship until junior year, which would be logical, right? And then since then, every single year for the last 15 years, it has moved up earlier, year after year. So like, until I see something change and go in the other direction, I'm not going to bank on it. So yeah, like if you guys are underclassmen, maybe it's not your time to recruit yet, but you're like thinking ahead and thinking about like, how soon do I need to start preparing? I would just assume the worst and assume that whenever it's your turn, it's going to be even earlier than it was for the people above you. And so that's why I say like there's no such thing as starting too early. Like if going back to what I said earlier about like checking that resume box, is like the most competitive candidates have like 3 or sometimes even 4 internships. The only way to have 3 or 4 relevant internships is if you start stacking those internships as a freshman. Like you get one your second semester of freshman year, then you get another one your freshman summer, then you get another one your first semester of sophomore year. That's 3 internships. The people that have 4 is because they started first semester of freshman year, right? That's how you get 4. And so like if you don't start until like freshman summer, or you don't start until first semester of sophomore year, it's almost impossible to get 3 or 4 internships that are relevant by the time you have to apply for your junior summer internship, right? That's why I said there's no such thing as starting too early. The earlier you start, the more competitive you're going to be. And we looked at the data ourselves too. Like for all the students that we've worked with in Wall Street Mastermind, we have a pretty large sample size at this point. The students that join freshman year typically get better results than people who join sophomore year. And people who join sophomore year then get better results than people who join junior year and so on and so forth. And the way that's defined is like we look at like what percentage of these people get into elite boutiques, what percentage of these people get into bulge brackets, what percentage of these people get into middle markets, what percentage of them get into smaller like regional firms, right? All this data is on our website. You guys can go look at it yourself. But like people that join freshman year, the majority of them get into tier 1 banks, right? Then that percentage, the tier 1 percentage goes slightly lower to sophomore year, then even lower to junior year, and even lower to senior year. So it's just math, right? Like the earlier you start, the better your outcome is going to be. Okay. What can we do for our sophomore summer since we're late for banks now? I mean, for your sophomore summer, I'm not sure when this question came in, but it's kind of what I said maybe 2 questions back when I was answering a DTS question about whether you need a name brand internship for your as a sophomore. Like, if you qualify for diversity and you can get a name brand internship, or brand name internship, that's also relevant. And that's like best of both worlds. But most people can't, right? So if you can't do that, then just get the most relevant internship you can get. Which again, you want to do something either transactional. So again, smaller investment bank or private equity firm or corporate development or even search fund or corporate banking. Like those are all transactional finance. Or you can do something valuation related. I would say transactional finance is my first choice. If you can't do something like that, then do something at least that's like valuation related, which means equity research, valuation firms, any investing role, small hedge funds, small family offices where you are having to invest in, where you're having to analyze individual stocks and put a price target on them, figure out if they're overvalued, undervalued. That's a very relevant skill set to banking because you do a lot of valuation in investment banking, right? So I try to get something like that for your sophomore summer. And like, if you're having trouble with that, again, something that we can definitely help you with. I think like the biggest mistake, and I think there's the last question I have in the queue, so we can end on this, but like the biggest mistake that we see people make when they're underclassmen and they're trying to get relevant internships is like a lot of people don't have any prior relevant internships. And so they don't know how to get their first relevant internship because they get stuck on kind of like this chicken and egg problem of like, well, everywhere I apply, I never get interviews. No one wants to interview me. And people don't want to interview me because like I don't have any relevant experience on my resume, right? But how am I supposed to get relevant experience if no one will hire me in the first place? It's kind of like chicken and the egg problem, right? And so like, which comes first? And so the mistake that most people are making is that if you're an underclassman, you have no relevant experience, and you're only going and applying to all these job postings that you see on places like LinkedIn or on Glassdoor, or on Indeed, or these major popular job sites that have like millions and millions and millions of users, and every job posting that goes on there gets like hundreds, if not thousands of applicants, the chances of your resume being the most competitive resume there is slim to none, especially if you have no relevant experience yet, right? So of course you're not going to get interviews, right? The way to actually get your foot in the door initially when you have no relevant experience is you have to network your way in. You have to go target like the smaller firms, not just like the super low hanging fruit that's in the really obvious places. You have to go uncover these smaller firms that are not everyone's applying to, not that people don't know about, right? So if you can do that, then you're essentially just competing against yourself, and it's going to be much easier. And also like your hope is not that people are hiring you because you're super qualified. Your hope is that people are hiring you because you're one of the only people that reach out, and they like your hustle and they like that you're hungry and you're grinding, and they want to give you a chance, right? And so, like we've compiled multiple different resources that each have like thousands of firms that are considered to be relevant, and like our underclassmen just use that inside of our program to like go and reach out to these firms, and they get internships pretty easily. And then once you have that first internship, then it becomes a lot easier to get your second one and your third one and fourth one, and you can kind of build on top of that, right? Motokan says, hey, what about people who already have a master's? Any advice for those and missed their chance on internships but have some banking experience? Yeah, I mean, depending on what kind of master's you're talking about. Like, is that a master's in finance? Is that MBA? Master's in finance and MBAs are treated differently, right? Master's in finance, you're basically still, you're treated the same as if you were just like a senior in college. Like, you're still going for analyst positions, and you're almost just like a super senior is the easiest way to explain it. So that's like a different recruiting timeline and cadence and different requirements, right? And also depends on if you're an international student or not. If you're an international student, it could be a lot trickier, right? If you're an MBA student, then you're recruiting for associate positions, right? And when you say like miss their chance on internships, does that mean like you recruited for a summer internship but you didn't get an offer, and then now it's too late to do that? Or I'm going to need a little bit more information to be able to answer this question in a helpful way. So maybe you can, give me some additional context. Let me go to the next question first. Andre asks, do you have a list of such smaller firms? I mean, there are thousands of them. Like, yes, we do have lists, but it's exclusive to people that are in our program already, because that's kind of like part of the competitive advantage that they have by working with us. So I can't just share that publicly. But if you are interested in working with us, then like I said, feel free to book a call with our teams. www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The streets abbreviated to ST. So it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we can learn more about your situation, what you need help with. And like, we don't work with everyone, but like, so you have to apply. But like, if it's a good fit, then we'll walk you through like how we might be able to help you. And if it's not a good fit, we'll still at least just give you some advice on what you could do, even on your own without us. Okay. So if you're interested, like, feel free to go and book a call there. Okay. I think I cleared through all the questions. So Nanza5 on YouTube says, hi, Sam. Hey, what's up, man? If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to drop them down below in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. Stay on for a few more minutes before I have to go and catch a train somewhere. But like, if not, then like I said, guys, hopefully this is helpful. But like, if you guys need help with the recruiting process, whether it's for investment banking or for buy-side recruiting, or whether you're a sophomore recruiting for a junior summer internship, or you're a freshman that just wants to get a head start, or you're a junior or senior and you're late and you're trying to catch up. We've helped people with all those profiles, even master's students too. So like, reach out to us, right? Book a call, wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. Learn more about us. We'll learn more about you. We'll ask you questions to figure out like what your situation is, because like the advice that we give you has to be tailored. It's not going to be one size fits all. So at a minimum, we'll just give you some personalized advice. But if everything, sounds good and you love everything that we're about and we love everything you're about and we think it's mutually a good fit to work together, then we can talk about what that might look like. And like I said, like, we've been around the longest out of all the programs on the market. We have the best track record. We got the most qualified coaches, former global heads of recruiting at all the top banks. We place people in every single Bulge Bracket League boutique bank. We have the longest track record, most testimonials, like, you name it, right? So like, if you want the best program out there, then not to toot our own horn, but like, I genuinely believe like we are it. Okay. Okay. One or two more questions did come in, so let me just answer those before we wrap up. But like, a master's in economics, but haven't done any summer internships and currently working in banking still as international students. Yeah, I mean, if you're a master's student and you're international, then depending on when your graduation date is, it could be a little bit tricky, right? Because you basically need a summer internship during the last summer before you graduate. So for example, if your graduation date is May 2025, then the summer internship you need is for summer 2024. And if you need a summer 2024 internship, then like the recruiting for that has been ongoing for a while already, right? And a lot of the bigger firms that sponsor visas have already finished recruiting, right? And so if they've finished recruiting and you need sponsorship, then it's going to make things difficult, right? So then you might have to like move downstream to some smaller firms. There are smaller firms that will also sponsor visas, but like it's a lot more rare, and there's a lot more of these firms. And so on a percentage basis of overall firms, like it's a super small percentage. And so it just becomes a lot harder to find like these firms in terms of like figuring out who they are. It's almost like the analogy is like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? So you have to like do massive amounts of networking to like uncover like who these firms are, right? And so that's like what you're most likely going to have to do if that's your situation. Also, whether you have 1 year OPT or 3 year OPT can make a difference. If you have 3 years of OPT, you have that STEM designation. It might make it slightly easier. If you have 1 year of OPT, it's going to be a lot harder. Okay. So I'm not sure that answered your question, but hopefully that helps. I'm starting a hedge fund that will be focusing on day trading for a year and then move on to real estate. Do you think we should just stick with day trading if we got our expected profits? I can't answer that for you, man. I'm not a day trader. I've never day traded. All I know is day trading can be very tough. It's very tough to make a living off of being a day trader because it's just a grind, and most people can't like consistently make enough profits to kind of like support themselves. But look, I'm not saying it can't be done. If you're good at it and you can do it, like by all means, but that's a very personal choice. So I can't really answer that for you. All right. All right. One last question from Nanda. Do you recommend delaying graduation for a better offer? Depends on your situation. I don't know. I would need to know more about you, but we have had a lot of students in Wall Street Mastermind that have done that. I can just off the top of my head, I probably know like at least 50 people that have delayed graduation to re-recruit and have successfully gotten an offer because of that. So it can be a viable strategy, but there are there's a lot of nuances that go into delaying graduation. Like how much would you be delaying by? What year are you currently in school? What does your resume look like? Are you international or not? And so like it's probably too much for us to cover here. But like, you know, if you want more specific feedback, just because we're about out of time, or else I would stay on and ask you more. But feel free to message me on either LinkedIn or on our Instagram page. That's the other thing. If you guys just have one-off questions that you want to ask us, the way to ask us questions normally without these live Q&As is you can follow our Instagram page, which is Wall Street Mastermind, and you can DM us there, or you can message me on LinkedIn. Obviously, my name is Sam Shaw. You can just find me like, you know, we'll try to be responsive to you in both of those places. Okay. All right. One last question, James McCauley. I know Guggenheim opened their app. Have any others? Yeah. We talked about this earlier, but you probably just joined. RBC has been open since September. Houlihan Lokey and Rothschild have been open since mid-November, which was about 3 weeks ago. And over the past week, Guggenheim open, like you said, and then Deutsche Bank also open as well. So that's 5 banks at a minimum, and we expect more to open between now and the end of the year, and more in January and more in February. Like from here on out, there's going to be more banks opening every single week, if not every single month. All right. So hopefully you guys are ready to rock. If you guys aren't, if you guys need help, or, you know, regardless, like if you just want to put your best foot forward, and what I tell everyone is like everyone has a floor and a ceiling in terms of what's possible and what you can accomplish. If you want to get as close to your ceiling as possible, that's what we're here for, right? Doing it yourself, I'm not saying you can't get in. You may be able to, you may not be able to. The odds are definitely stacked against you, given how competitive it is. But like, if you just do it yourself, you're not maxing out your potential. If you have our help, what I can guarantee is you will get a better outcome than if you were to do it yourself. Do yourself. So like, we will get you closer to your ceiling than you would have been able to do otherwise, right? And so if you understand how important that is when it comes to something as consequential as your career, then again, I encourage you guys to reach out to our team, www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's stmastermind.com/apply. Okay. Jay Coleman, graduate with BBA in economics, no banking experience. Would your program help get my foot in the door to firms? We're going to need to know more about you, man. Maybe we've worked with people that have recently graduated before. Depending on what you've been doing since you graduated. Are you an international student or not? If you're international, it's going to be a lot harder. If you're not international, we may be able to help you. Also depends on how long you've been graduated, so on and so forth. So yeah, man, like if you're like, it's hard for me to tell you with such limited information, just like one sentence. I would encourage you to book a call with our team, and then we'll dive deeper into your situation, and we'll be very honest with you about whether we can help you or not. Because to be honest, if we can't help you, we're not going to invite you to work with us because we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste our time. We're very protective of our success rate, And we only really like take people in if we're confident that there's a reasonable shot that we can help them get an offer. Okay. So anyway, all right, guys, it's great talking to y'all. Hopefully this is helpful, and I'm going to come back and try to do this again in early January. But in the meantime, happy holidays to all of you and your family, and hope you guys have a good the rest of your year, and we'll see you in the new year. All right. Talk soon. Bye.